You've almost certainly heard of the phrase being in the right place at the right time. And usually that's applied to people. For example, maybe you're heading towards a job interview and your competition gets caught in traffic and you don't. That's an example of being in the right place at the right time. Sure, you have the qualifications, but you happen to get there at the right instant, the right moment, and maybe that gives you a leg up. Or you happen to meet somebody when you're on holiday and you get to talking and it happens that they're involved in some business and you have a background in that business and you discuss and negotiate and you realize that you might be able to line up a job. Also, a bit arbitrary, but being in the right time and the right place. Of course, the qualifications count, they matter. Your background matters, but that element of luck matters as well as the environment itself. And it's based on this idea that I want to talk about, the left, politically speaking and culturally speaking. And it's a bit of a follow-up to my previous video, and not entirely. And essentially, the argument I'm going to make here is that despite all the other elements that go into left-wing politics and the reasons why the left has effectively won the so-called culture war, there remains one important element that I think many, many people neglect and don't talk about frequently enough. And that element, quite frankly, is being in the right place at the right time, historically speaking. Because if you think back on it, true left-wing politics of the sort we're familiar with these days, or even decades ago, never really had a foothold in history, not if you give it some thought and consideration. The reality is that for the majority of human history and civilization, right-wing ideologies, conservative thinking, were the dominant forms of political thought. And there's good reasons for this. Because for the most part, if you look at the grand landscape of human history, it was a harsh and brutal world. Technology was limited, and the environment was limited. As a response to that, you have what's effectively called conservative values, or right-wing values, guardedness, caution, discipline, routine, tradition, right? Why is tradition valuable apart from tradition's sake? Because presumably, tradition imparts some values that have withstood the test of time in a way that newer values don't. So all of these things go into the cauldron or into the stew of conservative right-wing thinking typically. And it makes sense because you want traditions, you want values, you want guardedness, you want caution when the world and the environment are fairly uncertain. And when the only way you can eke out an existence is by adhering to a disciplined routine, and one that requires constant vigilance and maintenance, and frankly speaking, obedience. That makes sense in a historical context. But what happens in the 19th century, and even more rapidly in the 20th, and even more rapidly than 20th in the 21st? Well, we get a brand new form of society, emboldened by technology and technological development, new comforts, new safety, new parameters. And all of a sudden, the older values seem somewhat less appealing. Because although ideology, of course, is important, the abstract behind ideology, the utility that is baked into every ideology is just as important. And the utility that goes into right-wing thinking and conservative thought has everything to do with a world that increasingly doesn't exist, a world of yesteryear, even a world of antiquity, a world that required this discipline, this guardedness, all of these things. It's not to say that that's not required at all anymore, but the degree to which these things are required, that degree has been severely diminished in the last few decades, and even to some degree in the earliest parts of the 20th century. And so what I'm arguing effectively is that, of course, the qualifications matter in a candidate, right? You wouldn't get the job if you weren't qualified. But it also is important for you to be there at the right time in the right place. Maybe it actually matters that the other guy got stuck in traffic or that you met somebody on vacation. and he was able to hook you up with a job. But as important as these things are, you need that extra element. Now, when it comes to political ideology, you need the meat and potatoes. You need the ideology itself. You need the desires, the wishes. And this is baked into left-wing ideology as well, of course. It has ideological underpinnings. It has hopes, desires, things it wants to achieve. But for left-wing ideology, the key, I think, was being in the right time and the right place, which is to say, left-wing ideology really took off after World War II, where we saw devastation, civilizationally, culturally, a sense of moral panic, as well as the rapid advancement of technology. And all this allowed left-wing ideology to really take off. Because what was being offered in contrast to that were the values of old. And these values increasingly were beginning to be perceived as stodgy and stuffy and useless. What's the point of maintaining certain rules? What's the point of maintaining discipline? No, the left came along and said, hold on, guys. You can do what you want. You can have wild orgies. You can just chill. You can have a good time. You can spend all day doing whatever you want. In modern times, playing video games. Whatever you want to do, you can do that. And there are no obligations, no restrictions. Nothing restricts you from doing what you want. Now, obviously that's an oversimplification. I'll grant you that. But in a nutshell, that was and is what the left typically offers in contrast to the right. The right offers traditions which may or may not be valuable anymore. It offers routine. It offers obligation. It makes demands of people. And of course, left-wing ideology also makes demands of people, but not the sort of demands that require necessarily a lot of effort. There are other sorts of demands, and we can talk about it another time. And so when we cut to the chase of it, the right just isn't sexy, and the left is. Not only does the left grant that you should have as much sex as possible, limitless sex, and should engage in the most licentious behavior possible, it also is a lot cooler, because the left says you're free to be you and me. You can do anything you want. The right says, no, hold on. We need restrictions on that. We need to be careful about that. And so whatever values the right had, whatever the utility of those values might have been, traditions, etc., the fact of the matter is, because of the historical setting, the environment, the technology, and all of these things coming together at the right time in the right place, left-wing ideology has been able to prevail and has been able to knock out right-wing ideology for the most part across the board in the West. There's not a single place in the West, and by that I mean North America and Western Europe, where any right-wing ideology has ascended. It's all left-wing to varying degrees. And the underlying premise for all these variations of this ideology is the same. Free to be you and me, do whatever you want. And that's very tempting. It's easier to do whatever you want than it is to stick to a routine, to maintain discipline, to do things you don't want to do, to fulfill obligations. That is dry and stuffy and boring and not fun. But the left comes along and says, look, guys, you can have fun. You don't need to do any of that. I'd argue ultimately that that is the greatest selling point the left has to offer, in contrast to the right. Fun, sexiness, coolness. How could anyone compete with that? Well, they can't. Now, of course, hypothetically, if civilization were to collapse and end, a lot of the left-wing thinking would recede as well, because left-wing thinking requires a certain type of technological advancement, a certain type of environment. And so, yeah, if everything were to go topsy-turvy, sure, right-wing ideology might very well be ascendant. But until that happens, we're stuck with this, because at the end of the day, the left is cool, in air quotes, and the right isn't. Thanks for tuning in. As always, hit the like button if you've not yet done so. Hit the subscribe button if you're not yet a subscriber. Hit the bell icon to be informed of forthcoming videos. because YouTube does not inform my subs of my videos. Share the video. And if I'm still alive, I'll check you out later. May the gods watch over you. You have a nice week. Take care. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.